Hi, my name is Thomas Maurer and welcome to Azure IaaS VM Operations. I'm part of the Azure engineering team, and in this session I'm going to show you how you can manage and operate VMs running in Azure and what the benefits of that is. So many of our customers think if they deploy virtual machines and services in Azure or at other cloud providers, they don't need to take care of managing these. And that's not 100% true. Of course, if you're deploying on PaaS services, we take care of the underlying infrastructure. Now, if you're deploying infrastructure as a service or IaaS, then you're still responsible for managing the operating system. We do all the hardware part, the placing of the virtual machines and all of that, but you're still responsible for the operating system. That doesn't mean that we don't want to help you doing that. And that's where we see it as a shared responsibility, and that we see cloud operations in general as a shared responsibility. So we as Microsoft, we are committed to provide a secure foundation. We take care of the physical assets in the data centers. We do the data center operations, and we build the cloud infrastructures in terms of hardware, but also software-wise, where we actually give you access to. Where we see each other as a joint responsibility is when it comes to virtual machines and apps and workloads, right? You still need to, like, if you deploy a virtual machine, you still need to take care of the operating system. If you deploy in the virtual network, you still need to make sure that you configure it in the right way and it's secure. If we think about apps and workloads, you still want to make sure that they're configured in the right way. If it comes to data, you want to take care that your data is protected and encrypted as well. However, we obviously want to give you the right tools to make your life easier when you deploy stuff in Azure. And so that's where our Azure management suite comes in, and especially addressing that if you look at infrastructure as a service virtual machines. So in this session, we're going to again use Tailwind Traders as one of our example companies. Tailwind Traders really represents everyone and no one at the same time. So we can basically take examples on it, and you will see that a lot of challenges Tailwind Traders has, they look very familiar, probably with your challenges as well. Now, if we're looking at the challenges Tailwind Trader has when it comes to IaaS VM management, there are a couple of them I want to show you, and a couple of them we're going to talk about in this session. Now, first of all, Tailwind Traders wants to make sure that the virtual machines they're using in their production systems are not really exposed to the internet and are configured in a secure manner. They also want to make sure that their virtual machines, where they run different applications, but also SQL Server, for example, that they're backed up and they can actually recover it. They also want to make sure that all their systems and servers are patched, right? They want to take care of the Linux and Windows servers and make sure that they have the latest security updates in place and they're compliant with their security practices. And then the last thing is really, they want to have a change tracking solution. They want to make sure that they know what happened to a virtual machine, like was there a change happening to that virtual machine or server, and who did it, and like how can we figure that out? So those are the 4 top level challenges we're going to have a look at. However, in this session, we also have something called the lightning demos. So to make sure that we show you a lot of more features which help you to manage your Azure IaaS VM, we also going to show you some demos about which are called lightning demos, which just show you a quick set of some functionality to help you manage your infrastructure service VMs. So we want to start off with one of them. And that's basically how do I create a virtual machine using CloudShell? Now, if you create a virtual machine and if you started with Azure, you probably went to the portal and deployed it that way. You can also obviously use PowerShell or CLI to deploy it, or use ARM template with infrastructure as code, or go even do a DevOps pipeline using, for example, Azure DevOps to basically go out and deploy that stuff. Now, I want to show you a quick way how you can do it from Azure Cloud Shell. So Azure Cloud Shell is built into the Azure portal, if you will, and gives you a shell where you can run different commands. There is a Bash and a PowerShell experience. So here we are in the Azure portal, And what I'm going to do, I'm going to open up PowerShell, Cloud Shell. I'm going to set the admin password. And then I'm just using some Azure CLI commands to basically go out and create that VM. Again, you can see here we're configuring everything like the virtual network, the operating system, and set the password. And we just hit enter and it goes out and basically creates that VM for us. And we're going to use that VM later on in our basically presentation. But again, this is a very simple way how you can create a VM using Cloud Shell. So let's dive into the challenges of Tailwind Traders. So how does Tailwind Traders make sure that their administration of their infrastructure as a service VM is actually secure? How may they make sure that they're not just exposed to the internet and everyone can access it? And you should know that by default, if you create an Azure VM, that VM gets a public IP address assigned. And this can absolutely make perfect sense because sometimes you just want to try something out. You want to get access from the internet, right? But if you're like Tailwind Traders in a corporate environment, you probably just assign private IP addresses to these servers. So now the question really becomes, how do I now manage these servers? Like, for example, I can go through a VPN, but sometimes what if the VPN is not running? What if there is no VPN, if I just run the system? So I need something of a kind of like a jump host, right? So what we did in the past was we basically set up a VM, which was our jump host, and only that one got assigned a public IP address. So we could actually access that. And then from that one, we jumped to different VMs. However, we still needed to manage that VM. We still have the cost for that VM. We need to make sure that this VM was actually secure. So there are certain things which are challenging. And so I want to introduce you to something called Azure Bastion. And Azure Bastion really takes over that jump host, kind of like a jump host as a service, if you will, which helps us to connect to VMs running in an Azure virtual network in a private IP address space using the portal to basically manage and configure those VMs in a secure manner. So let's jump in and just deploy a Azure Bastion instance. And here I'm in the Azure portal. I'm in the marketplace. You can see here I have Azure Bastion. But before I can actually deploy that, let's go to my virtual networks, because Azure Bastion needs a subnet within my virtual network to basically get assigned, and that's where we deploy the Azure Bastion instance. So here we can go and let's say we have the default subnet. Now we create one new one and we call that the Azure Bastion subnet. So we're going to assign that. We can also change the address range from that subnet if we want to. I'm going to deploy that because that's basically where we then deploy the instance, this Azure Bastion instance. So the next step is actually going out and deploy Azure Bastion. And for that, we create a new resource. Go to the marketplace if we're looking for Bastion here. We search. We will find Bastion, currently in preview, and then we click on create. And now we need to select the subscription, the resource group we want to deploy it, give that instance a name, the region we want to deploy it. And now, depending on that, we have different virtual networks we can choose. So in our case, it's going to be that VM Store VNet. And then you can see here the Azure Bastion subnet. So this one, the Azure Bastion also gets then assigned a public IP address. And if we check, we're going to create that. And this public IP address is just assigned to the Azure Bastion service. This is not assigned directly to any VM of yours. This is just to like actually have a connection to that Azure Bastion service. So this will take a while to deploy. After it's deployed, we can go to our Azure virtual machines. And if I click on that virtual machine, and if I click on connect, let's go first to the networking. You can see here that this VM does not have a public IP address assigned, right? It only has a private IP address. So it's not really accessible from my local machine here, which is not connected to that private IP address space. So if I go back and now I'm going to connect, I can choose RDP or SSH as before, but however, this only works then with the private IP address, and if I don't have any VPN in place, I can't really access that one. So what we can do now with Bastion is it sees that there's Bastion deployed, so I give the username and password of the VM, click on connect, and now it opens up in my browser a new window which gives me basically a remote connection to that VM. And now I can basically go and manage that VM. You can see here I'm logged into that Windows server here. You can see here if I look at that local server here, this is a Windows Server 2019 machine, and I can now go and basically start configuring and installing or troubleshooting that machine, whatever I need. Again, this is not like a design for like multi-user or whatever. For that we have Windows Virtual Desktop, but this is like basically a jump host solution for our admins who need to have access to that specific VMs. So this is how Azure Bastion works. Let's start on the left side here. You can see here, me as a user, I'm basically using an encrypted connection over TLS to the Azure portal. And from there, I'm connecting to the Bastion service, which also over TLS. So it's everything encrypted. And from there, this is based in my private virtual network. And this Bastion host then basically connects to the virtual machine I actually want to have access to, which is basically hosted in that target VM subnet. And then it configures the NSGs in the right way and modifies it, so I have basically access to that. So a very secure way of managing your Azure VMs from the portal if you need access to them. Again, it works with RDP and SSH to access these. So that was a quick demo about Azure Bastion. Now, in some cases, you really want to have a public IP address assigned to your virtual machine. However, obviously you don't want everyone in the world to basically be able to access and try to connect to that VM and then just try like a brute force attack to find out, okay, what's username and password so they can log in. So you want to only give access to a specific point in time to only a specific, let's say, range of IP addresses. And that is where JustInTime VM Access comes into play. So here I'm back in the Azure portal, and JustInTime VM Access really is part of the Azure Security Center. So here I'm already in the Azure Security Center. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to clean this up a little bit, make it a little bit easier. And then I scroll down, and then you can see here under Advanced Cloud Defense, you can see our feature called JustInTime VM Access. Now you can see here that I haven't configured that for any VM right now. So the first thing we need to do, we need to configure JustInTime VM Access for a VM, right? Right now, basically everyone can access that specific VM. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to click on Recommended. We see here our VM. And now we say Enable JustInTime VM Access. So it gives me a default set already. It says, okay, hey, these are probably the ports you want to enable for that specific VM when you do JustInTime VM Access. Now, in our case, I really don't want to have SSH because this is a Windows machine. I don't have SSH installed in that machine in that case. I don't want to use PowerShell Remoting. Right now, I really just want to have RDP. So again, you can add more ports if you will. You can configure that the way you want it. But for now, we just want to have RDP access. Now I can also configure that a little bit further and say, hey, okay, which port is that? I can also say which protocols, and then also the max time I can request. So I can go up here, let's say we go to 10 hours. So whenever I then request access, I can request it up to 10 hours. I can also shorten that time if I want to, but this is the time the max time I make it available. So I configure that. And this now, if I save this, will configure the VM for JustInTime VM Access. So now, if I want to connect to it, as you can see here, I need to request access to that VM. So when that happens, I need to basically say, okay, I want this port to be on. I want to have like a specific time. So in my case, okay, 10 hours, that's okay. We take the max right now. But of course, if I say, hey, I only have a task which goes an hour, I can also go down to an hour if I needed to. And then you can see in the middle of the screen, it now is smart and just takes the IP address of my machine where I'm logged into the portal and takes my public IP address. So wherever I am located, it limits that access to my IP address. However, if I want to open up for someone else, like there's a different location or different IP addresses, I can just give them, like they can give me their IP range, their public IP range from where they're connecting, and I can make sure that they are the only person who actually can access that VM. So if someone from like wherever they are based in wants to connect, they're not able to connect. So let's open up that port. And now Security Center and JustInTime VM Access goes out and configures the network security group of that specific VM, which was before blocked. Now it opens it up for the specific, for my IP address. And now if I go to connect, you will be able, I can now go and do the same thing as I would have done before. Basically open up the RTP connection and then just click on connect. Again, can obviously also add clipboard and printers and then click on connect. And this will open up my connection here. Then I still need the password, username and password for it. And this will log me in. Now I have the full RTP capabilities, but again, limited to just my IP address for the next 10 hours. And after 10 hours, basically, it's again blocked. I cannot reconnect to it if I needed to. Again, I would then just need to have another request and basically say, hey, there I am. So this really helps me like track who did actually request that access. So who did actually open up that port, so I can track it. It's audited, like there's an audit option for it. I can see how long was the port open from which IP address. So it really reduces the attack surface and only opens up ports of virtual machines when I need them. And again, just for selected ports for the limited time, for pre-approved IP addresses, if you will. So again, great solution if you actually need to have those internet-facing VMs. So I want to quickly show you the next lightning demo, and this is perfect because I just showed you how you can actually do these RTP connections and all of that. But what if I just want to do a PowerShell Remoting connection as well? So we can actually use PowerShell Remoting from our machine. You have seen that I configured the ports there, but I can also use PowerShell Remoting directly from Cloud Shell. So let me jump in here. I already opened up Cloud Shell here. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to start PowerShell version of Cloud Shell. So as you can see here, I'm now running PowerShell. I'm going to set my credentials for our remoting connections, username and password. I'm going to save that. And now I'm going to enable that specific configuration. So I'm going to enable ACVM PS Remoting, and this will go out and configure PowerShell Remoting for the VM, but also for the network security groups and so on. You can see here I configured which protocol it should use, that it's for a Windows operating system. It works also with SSH and Linux, so you can basically go out and simply configure that. You do that once per VM, and then you can run, for example, enter ACVM. Again, give it the name of the VM, the resource group, and then the credentials. And now you can see here we are connected to that machine. You also see that this is actually a public IP address. So I'm going to talk about that in a bit. But now you see here, it's actually a Windows machine. So you can see here that we are connected there. I can also list my services here. I could also go out and get the Windows features and then basically install like Wins. And now if I list the feature, you can see here that now Wins is installed on that machine, and that is why it's called Wins and not Lose. Now, again, this can be useful in some scenarios, but be aware that this now opened up the ports in a public way, right? So it's now using the public IP address to basically connect, and you just opened up the PowerShell Remoting port for that virtual machine. So just be aware of that. Again, very handy, but you need to take care of that. So let's go to the next challenge. How does Tailwind Traders ensure that IaaS VMs and IaaS hosted SQL databases can be recovered in the event of an error or corruption? Now, the first thing we obviously need to do is actually back up our Azure IaaS VM, including the SQL server and the SQL database running in that IaaS VM. Now again, you can also use PaaS services like Azure SQL to host your databases. In that case, it's a much different story. You can also run backups on that as well. But for now, this scenario, we're running really a real SQL server, like as you know from on-prem, in an Azure IaaS VM. So this is handy if you do, for example, a lift and shift of your server and you don't migrate to a PaaS service. Again, highly recommend that you'll have a look if you're migrating or running databases in Azure, that you'll actually look at Azure SQL and other solutions out there, whatever database technology you need. Now, here I'm in the Azure portal again, and what I'm going to do here to run backups, but also disaster recovery, I'm going to create a recovery service vault. That's actually the service which does backup and disaster recovery, and so we need one of these. So I'm going to create a recovery service vault, subscription, select the resource group, and give it a name, and select the region. And then I just go out and create that recovery vault. Now, I can now use that recovery vault to basically go out and configure backups for my machines. So you can see here, I go into that recovery vault and choose backup. And now you can see here, I can actually, it helps me to figure out, because Azure Backup can do a couple of things. I can also backup my on-prem backup my machines as well, or my on-prem data or data from other cloud providers as well. But in my case, I want to obviously back up the data from my Azure IaaS VM. And then what do I actually want to back up? In my case, I want to back up a virtual machine. So I'm selecting that, I click on it. And now I can configure backup policies. I'm going to do that. I give that policy a name. And then I can configure different things. So I can obviously configure the backup schedule. So I can say, hey, I want the daily backup, create daily backups at 12 a.m. And then how many recovery points I want to retain. And I can configure different retention rates here if I wanted to. So I can go up and say, hey, do it, for example, like daily for the next 180 days. I can do keep a weekly one for 12 weeks. And then I can also go monthly and even yearly backup and configure that the way I want it. I select then which VMs I actually want to back up, right? So I'm going to select the VMs here, click OK, and then say enable backup. And this will now enable the backup with the specific policy for my Azure virtual machine. Now, I also have some SQL databases running in Azure virtual machines. So I want to go and do that. And so what I can do here is go out and say discover. So this will go out and check my virtual machines and see, hey, you're running SQL Server in that specific machine. So we're going to run that discovery process. And you can see here, we're going to select that virtual machine here, which runs one of the SQL servers here. And then let's say discover databases. Now, after a while, we can see here, okay, it found 4 databases. So we're going to configure backup now for these. And you can see here, here's our instance. If we open that up, you can see here that we have different databases. And again, let's do all of them. Let's back up all of these databases. Again, I can set a policy for it and then enable backup. And this is really now a SQL Server or database specific backup for these virtual machines. So it's very easy to set this up without even connecting to the operating system. We could set it up in the Azure portal doing that. So let's go back to the recovery vault here. And now if we look at backup items, we can now see here we do 4 backup items like database, but also then virtual machines, we have 3 virtual machines backed up. And again, we are waiting here for the initial backup, which is pending. To speed that process up, we can, for example, go backup now. And then we can also say, hey, okay, keep that backup until that specific date. So we can even manually trigger that. And so for now, we're going to do that quickly for all of our machines here. And you can see this works for not just for Windows VMs, but also for Linux machines as well. Now I go back again, I can see here that I now did the Azure VM backup, and I have also obviously some like SQL database backup items as well configured. You can see here I have more. So I can, for example, if I have System Center Data Protection Manager running on-prem, I can basically connect that up as well. I can back up Azure files. I can also just install backup agents on systems, on servers, on Windows 10 devices to back them up. So if I have these VIP devices, I can also just run an agent on it and they will back up files or even server images to basically to Azure, and you can go out and restore it from there. And then if you need on-prem backup and you need an application-aware backup for on-prem, like for Exchange, SharePoint, SQL files, and so on, you can download Azure Backup. And Azure Backup gives you actually the capabilities of System Center Data Protection Manager for basically free. You just pay for the backups you're doing in Azure. And then the only downside is that you don't have tape support, like for long-term storage, because for long-term storage, you're actually going to use Azure, right? So there are many different options when it comes to backup. Now, backups are fantastic, don't get me wrong, but you also need to be able to recover from this, right? You need to be able to restore these backups. So I'm going to show you a little bit how we're actually going to restore these backups. And here I'm like on my server, which is a SQL server and has a database, or the database we just backed up. So we can have a look here and we can see our Tailwind Traders database. We have a couple of tables here and you can see here our hovercraft inventory database. So I can now go and let's say we just do the smart thing and delete that table, which is probably not that smart, which I just found out. So we need to go out and actually restore it. So here I'm back in the Azure portal. You can see here now that I have different options. So I want to go out and basically restore that database. So now this is the restore wizard. I can then say, hey, I want to restore to an alternate location or override the existing database. And then also select the specific instance we have here, if we have multiple instances, and then especially give it a name. Okay, now we can basically see how all the recovery points. So we just, in this case, for the demo, we just have one, but if I have multiple, I can have multiple recovery points here. I'm going to select that one. And then I basically can configure where should be the target path to restore it. If I have some special configuration, I can see that there as well and reconfigure it the way I want it. Now this will then take a little bit of a moment to basically restore. But then if I do refresh now, here I can see my recovery database. And then I can go, if I go to tables, I can now see that I have that hovercraft inventory table there back, and I can actually move that and basically restore there and take over that table if I want to. Now, so if I want to do that for VMs, I can also restore a full VM here. So I can basically go and say, hey, restore VM, do file recovery, but in our case, we really want to do a full VM. And then here I have also, you can see I have multiple recovery points in that case, and I can select one. And now I can select again what I want to do. In my case, I create a new VM, give that VM a name. So you can see I give it a restore name. I can now select which storage account I'm going to be using, on which virtual network they're joining, and so on and so on. And basically configure that and say restore VM. And this will now restore the specific VM. Again, this will take obviously a while because it needs now to copy all the data. But if I then go back to to my recovery vault, I can see here in the activity log what's actually going on, that there is a restore process is running. I can then refresh and see what's going on. Now it's a validation operation to make sure that the restore actually was good. Do that restore. And now when that is done, I can basically go to virtual machines. And guess what? You will now see my restored virtual machine called Ubuntu Restore. And so I can go to that VM, and you can see here it gets configured. It's in the right virtual network. I select it and gets all that configuration back. And I can now go out and maybe copy some files or basically use that VM instead of the other one, whatever I intend to do. So how does it actually work? If we look at this, for example, we have a VM with some disks on there. What we actually do is we create a recovery service vault, and the Azure backup service then will go out and trigger a backup. And then it will basically go out and do a snapshot of these disks. And as it move them over to the recovery vault, this can be also in incremental blocks, and those are encrypted in the Azure Key Vault. You can do that, like one recovery vault supports up to 1,000 virtual machines, which you then can basically back up to that. On the Linux side, we're basically also using, to make it consistent, we use a file system freeze. In that case, we can run a pre-script and a post-script if we want to when the backup is done, to basically make sure that the application is backed up in a consistent way, depending on, again, your applications and whatever you're running there. You can restore a couple of different things. I already mentioned it. You can restore individual files, disks, or VMs, or then even go out and replace disks inside a VM if you want to. So now we want to show you the next lightning demo, and this is how you quickly can resize a VM, right? So here I'm in the Azure portal. I have a virtual machine running here. I want to quickly change the size, so I can go to size. And then you see here, I'm currently running a very small virtual machine, and I realized, there's probably not enough power, right? So I will need a larger virtual machine for that. So I'm just going to select, and it gives me the choice of different virtual machines I can go out. And basically just select the size I want, click on resize, and that's basically how I can actually go out and resize a virtual machine. So if I pick the wrong size, or if I pick the right size, but my virtual machine workloads are growing or are different in a certain time, I can basically go out, resize the virtual machine. I can also go down and basically make it smaller again when the large task is done. So let's have a look at one of the other challenges of Tailwind Traders. How does Tailwind Traders ensure that both Windows and Linux IaaS VMs have the most recent software updates applied? And I think almost every company out there who actually runs servers in their environment has the same challenges. I have seen customers spend hours and hours to figure out how we actually can update or build that automation to update their server infrastructure, right? And so the same thing happens in Azure. As I mentioned, you're still responsible for updating your virtual machines, right? If you're not using PaaS services, if you're using infrastructure as a service virtual machines, you need to be able to update the operating system. So in this demo, we have a tool called Azure Update Management, which I quickly want to show you how you can actually use that to keep your Linux and Windows virtual machines up to date. Now here I'm back in the Azure portal. You can see here, again, I'm running a couple of VMs. Some of them are Windows VMs, some of them are Linux VMs here. So I'm going to one of my VMs here. And if I scroll down, I can basically go to Update Management. Now, because first time I need to enable this. So I'm going to enable that for that specific VM. Since I already have a log analytics workspace and so on, it will basically connect me to that. It will create the specific resources if I need them, and basically go and create an automation account where the update management solution is. So it will do all of that for me. And then it will take a while, and it will show me that I currently have a couple of updates missing, etc. But now let's also, before we go there, let's enable that for also some other VMs here. And let's go to, like, for example, that Linux VM and go to Update Management. And now in this case, let's just enable it for all the VMs in this subscription. Again, I can then still select which VMs I want. So I'm going to select all the other ones, but well, the restore one I don't need. I'm going to remove that later. So let's enable Update Management there for all of them. Now again, that process will take a moment because it's going out and configure all these VMs. But now if I go back, for example, to my first VM here, I scroll down, I go to update management. Let's see here that we have a couple of updates missing, right? So it says you have some missing updates. So I want to go and schedule an update deployment. Now let's call this update 2019A. Select all the update classifications I want to deploy. I can include or exclude updates. If I don't want certain updates to be installed, I can also do that. And then I'm going to schedule it. So I'm going to give it a scheduled time. Let's say I want to run it at that specific time. And then I'm going to schedule that. In that case, we're just doing it a one-time update. I can then run pre and post scripts if I want to. So if I need to configure anything before the update or after the update, I can do that as well. I can configure the maintenance window and basically the reboot options. And usually reboot, if required, is a good one to choose. And now we have that deployment update scheduled. So we can see here it's ready. The updates are still missing, but it will run a little bit later on. And if we go here to inventory, we can now see here that we also have a couple of updates which are installed here. You can see here which version and which updates there actually are. And we get that software inventory here. So if I go back to inventories, you can see here the different updates. And now I can also do that for multiple VMs, for example. So let's say here I see all my VMs and you can see they're all compliant, but they have some missing updates, right? They don't need necessarily be compliant to have all the updates, but you can see here a couple of them are missing. So what I'm going to do here now, I'm going to do another update deployment. And this time I want to update all my Linux machines. So I'm going to select Linux. And again, I can create groups of VMs here. Also dynamic groups based on tags, but in our case, we're just going to select our Linux machines here. You can see here the different Ubuntu machines I have here. Click OK. And then I can also go again, include, exclude, updates, and now we're going to schedule it. So this time, we're not just going to schedule it, we're making it a recurring task. So every week, we're going to basically on Tuesday, we're going to go and install updates at a specific point in time. So all the time at 5 p.m., we're going to install updates on these systems. Again, obviously you do that whenever your maintenance window is. I can run pre and post scripts, and then I can configure, again, the reboot options. Again, reboot if required usually makes a lot of sense, but you can also say always reboot or don't reboot at all, because we probably have other tasks which you want to run before you reboot. So I've now scheduled that. So if I go to update deployments, you can see all of them here. And a little bit later on, you will see that they were running. And you can also see, hey, I still all the Linux are now gone. They are all patched. I only have now from the Windows machines, I have a couple of updates which are missing here. And if I look at this, you can see here, the Ubuntu one has 0 missing updates. Or also security wise, we don't have any critical updates there as well. So this is really a good solution to keep track of it. By the way, as you can see here on the screen, you cannot just use this for Azure VMs. We also can enable that for non-Azure VMs, meaning servers which are running on-prem in your data center or at other cloud providers, right? You can then manage that, get that single pane of glass to view all of your machines and see if they're compliant and schedule updates and schedule that automation as well. So how does update management actually work? So it does compliance scans, depending on what you have installed on Windows every 12 hours, on Linux 3 hours or every 15 minutes if you have the MMA agent installed. And it goes out, it basically does an assessment, goes out, you can deploy, schedule these updates, and then again it verifies compliance and it starts from the beginning. You can, for Linux computers, you can use local or public repositories for your update environment. And for Windows, you can check against Microsoft Update, or if you have WSUS in your environment, you can still leverage WSUS as a source for your updates. So I want to show you some other lightning demo before we go to the last one. And this one is about VM password reset, right? So many of you, sometimes it happens to me, I deploy a VM, I use it don't use it for 2 months, and I forgot the password. Now, what do? There are certain processes you could try to change the password, but Azure gives you a very simple option. So here I'm in the Azure portal. Again, you see my virtual machines here. I basically go to that virtual machine. I can scroll down on the troubleshooting and support. There's a reset password option. So I give it the username and password and say reset, and this will reset the password. And funny enough, not a lot of people know about this feature and then basically need to go out and redeploy VMs or and so on. But this feature actually makes it super easy. If you forgot your password and you just quickly want to change it, you can do that using the reset password feature. However, you will obviously need to know which user it actually is, so you can basically do that. So let's go out and have a look at the last big challenge of Tailwind Traders we're going to talk about today. So how does Tailwind Traders track modifications made to software configuration on Windows and on Linux IaaS VMs? So for that, I want to introduce you to inventory and change tracking, which is built into Azure. And here we again have a list of our IaaS virtual machines. And if I go to one of these, I can scroll down and you can see here I have inventory, and I can enable inventory again for a VM or all the VMs in the subscription, like similar to update management. In that case, I'm just going to enable it for that specific VM. Again, this will take a few minutes until everything shows up here. You can see here it tells me up to 15 minutes until the data shows up. Now, after that, you can see that we get some screen, but again, the data will come in later, so we'll not see it right now. It takes a couple of minutes. Let's configure that for some of the other VMs as well. Let's scroll down to inventory. And then again, let's just enable that for a couple of the subscriptions here in that subscription. And then basically, okay, we can also say, hey, I want some custom configuration of the log analytics workspace, and then basically say enable. In our case, we're going to use the same log analytics and automation account we also use for the update management, which makes it much easier to handle. But obviously, we can also configure that in a different way if we want to use other ones. So now let's do something stupid. Let's go to one of the servers and install Firefox, right? You don't really want to have a browser or browse the internet on a server, but to basically see the power of it, we can now go out and just do that. So we install Firefox on one of our servers here. And you can see here, I also quickly want to show that it works. We can also then use the best search engine in the world. And you can see here that actually worked. So we installed Firefox on that specific machine. And if we now go to change tracking, we can now see that there was a change to that VM, right? So you can see here there was a change, and we now have software installed from Firefox and the Mozilla maintenance service. So we can immediately see that there was some change happening to that VM. And if we go to the inventory, we can also immediately see the log that we have now, not just updates installed, but also software installed on that machine, in which that we have now Firefox in that case. Now, let's go to an Ubuntu VM here. Let's go to a Linux machine to check that out, how that looks like. And if I go now to, let's say, inventory, I can see here the different software packages which are installed. Again, I can also search what is running. I can see the different Linux daemons running. I can see the files and so on. And if I go to change tracking, I obviously can see here also the changes which are happening inside that VM. And since we have a couple of changes here, since we really just deployed that VM, you can see here that we have a couple of changes on that as well. Now, we're also going to do a change. For that, I'm going into Cloud Shell, and I do a SSH connection to that VM, so we can actually go and install something on it. So I do it just, again, this VM is exposed to the internet, so I'm going to connect to that. Yes. And now you can see here I'm connected to my Linux Ubuntu machine, which runs in Azure. Let's go and update here quickly. And then let's go and install Nginx. So this goes out and now deploys the Nginx web server on that machine and goes out and installs all the things we need. And now let's see what change tracking on inventory says. So for change tracking, we can now see or now search for Nginx. And you can see here that now the changes specific to Nginx, and we can see here what the resources and changes were and what packages basically got installed. And we can see exactly when they actually were installed on that machine. And obviously I can also now go to the inventory and see that there as well if I wanted to. So that's inventory and change tracking. It basically allows us to determine where changes and when they were made to that VM. It tracks software services, registries, file changes for Azure VMs, and then it can be also track on-prem and third-party VMs which are running. So it's not just limited again through Azure VMs. You can really do that for multiple sources as well. So there's a time for one more lightning demo, and so I want to quickly show you the auto shutdown feature. Now, as you know, if you deploy a VM in Azure, you usually have a pay-as-you-go plan. So whenever your virtual machine is running, you pay for it. If you shut it down, you don't pay for the virtual machine. You probably pay for storage, but you don't pay for the virtual machine. So when I, for example, have my lab, I work on the VMs during the day, but in the night they should actually shut down, right? Because I don't want to spend that money on it. So there's an auto shutdown feature, and in the past, we basically used scripts to do that, but now it's basically built in. So I go to one of my Azure VMs here. Again, I can scroll down, can go to auto shutdown, can enable it, and then I can say, okay, at which time I basically want to shut down my VM. In that case, like 1 o'clock in the morning in Sydney, that sounds like a good time. So we're going out and shut it down. We can also go and send notification if we needed to, basically, or run a webhook when the VMs get shut down, or we can send out an email when the VMs get shut down, right? So that's very handy if multiple people are working on it and you want trigger some sort of automation as well. So in this session, you have learned how Tailwind Traders solve the following problems. First of all, they made sure that how we actually can securely connect to Azure IaaS VMs. So they're not directly exposed to the internet, and we can actually secure that connection. You also learned how you actually back up Azure IaaS VMs, including SQL Server running in Azure IaaS VM, and how you actually can recover these. You also learned how you can manage software updates across your virtual machines running in Azure. And then also how you can do software and configuration changes and track these actually directly within the Azure management tools. Again, a lot of these services are also working in a hybrid environment. So these are not just limited to VMs running in Azure. You can also extend that to your servers running on-prem or other cloud providers as well. If you want to learn more, we have all the resources for our sessions here on our GitHub repositories, where you get the videos, the slides, the demo videos, and some step-by-step guidance. And then if you're looking at certification, highly recommend you look out at the Azure Administrator certification, which you can do. And then again, all the resources here in one place as well. So with that, I want to say thank you, and I hope to see you in the next one.